Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how to use IMGUI for the ESP with a nice menu. Also show you a universal way to hook the user input with WindowsProc, which should work for any game. But anyways, we're going to need two libraries, of course IMGUI and Detours, which is the Windows hooking library. You could use another one like Kiro or Minhook, but we're going to use the easiest one for now. If you don't have them installed, I recommend using vcpkg, which is the Windows C++ package manager to install libraries. So after you install them through vcpkg, you can just do #include detours and just like that for any project you have. But we're also going to need IMGUI, which I'm going to include right now. That exists an item. IMGUI, and depending on what you're hooking, so our game right now, Sol Cube, uses OpenGL for its graphics backend, so we need to include Windows 32 in OpenGL. If the game you're hooking uses DirectX, then you would include those libraries instead. But this video is going to cover OpenGL. If you don't know what backend your game uses, you can just open your game, go to Cheat Engine, you open Sol Cube, go to Memory View, go to Tools, and it's View, and enumerate DLLs and symbols, and just look through here. We should see OpenGL and SDL2, I believe, somewhere around here. Here's SDL2. And we're going to be hooking two functions. We're going to be hooking the SDL set relative mouse. This is what hooks your mouse to the center of the screen, so we don't have a mouse right now because it's using relative mouse mode. So we need to disable that so we can actually see our mouse and move it without the game capturing it. We're also going to hook the WglSwapBuffers. Oops, I need to scroll up again. And this is what we're going to hook to draw our ESP and our IMGUI menu. So let's do that real quick. We're going to go to our constants.h, and we're going to hook those functions. First, we have to typedef them to their actual calling convention. So for the WglSwapBuffers, it's a bool. It's an std call. So std call pointer, because it's a function. We're going to type it, or we're going to call it swap buffers, and it takes HDC. When you're hooking functions like this, you need to make sure your function signature is exactly as the one in the binary, otherwise your game is going to crash. Now you can verify this using the library's documentation, or if you don't have access to documentation, you're going to have to use the assembly instead. But anyways, we're also going to extern our new swap buffers, WGL. Just gonna copy this. Call it new, or this is the original swap buffers. Now we're going to do the same thing for the relative mouse mode, which is what it's typedef int. It's a fast call for this one. It's pointer to SDL. Set relative mouse mode. Now this type name we're using doesn't really matter. What matters is the signature. This is just what we're naming that new type. Just to make sure no one gets confused. And int mode. And we're going to extern that, and we're going to just use our relative mouse mode. Now we're going to actually get those addresses. Now there's two ways you can get these addresses. You can either use exe-based address like this, or you can just use Windows built-in function for libraries, which is the getProc address function. Let me go back here. I'm going to copy this. And this new, or this original swap buffers, it's going to be WglSwapBuffers. And so what this is doing, it's getting the module handle of OpenGL32 DLL, which is just getting the base address of that DLL. And then it's getting the process address of the module handle and our function name. Now this needs to be exact, the same way you see it when you're looking up here in the enumerate DLL symbols. It needs to be exactly the same. So if we're trying to hook ntddl rtl delete, we have to copy that exactly. Otherwise, it's not going to find the function. We're going to do the same thing for the relative mouse mode. And we're not going to use DXE base address because that's a bit harder to do. We get proc address, same way we did before. Module handle STL2 and STL set relative mouse mode. Now we're going to be making the actual menu. So we're going to make a new header file called menu.h. And we're going to have a couple functions here inside a menu namespace just to make it nice. We're going to have a toggle menu function. We're going to have an init to initialize the IMGUI menus. Void start render. Render and end render. So let's start with toggle menu since that one's the easiest by far. And we're going to include a few things before we do that. We're also going to need constants for our hooked functions. We're also going to need OpenGL, gl/gl.gl. It should come when you install IMGUI. And we're going to need gl/glue, I think that's how you say it. /glue. glue.h. We're going to need to pragma comment these so we can actually use their functions. And then we're going to include IMGUI. And the other two ones we included are, or downloaded, I mean, which is IMGUI/OpenGL32 and the Windows 32 one. And we're going to make a few globals. We're going to have our constant IMVector2. IMVector2 is the default vector2 for IMGUI. And it's going to be our window size, or initial window size, actually. Whoops, thought you did a bit too much. Initial window size, I'm just going to make it 400 by 400. That should be good. Our bool for show menu, let's make it false by default. Bool initialized. A bool for context created, which will make sense in a second. Our handle to our game window, which is HWMD. Our HGLRC, did I spell that right? HGLRC. My context. And we're going to have another one for the game context. I'll explain all of this in a second. I'm just going to make all the global variables first. Game context. Then we have HDC, global HDC, which is the handle to the OpenGL interface. And then we're going to have the WindowsProc, original WindowsProc, which we're going to use to hook the user input. This user input function that we're hooking handles all input output through the application. So it handles the opening files, closing files, your keyboard, your mouse, closing the window, any input to the window will be handled by these functions. So when we hook this, we have to be really careful that we do it correctly. Otherwise, we won't be able to move the mouse or close the window correctly without using Task Manager, and it can get really messy. So we need to be really careful when we do this. Actually, let's do that right now since I just talked about it. It's going to be lresult callback new WndProc. It's going to take these arguments. This is wrong though. And we're also going to have to turn IMGUI implementation towards the API. It's going to return an lresult. And it's this. Perfect. And if our menu is showing, we're going to pass this function over to the IMGUI input handler. If it detects input to the GUI, we're going to return 0 instead. Returning 0 basically says we're done processing input, nothing else needs to be processed. Otherwise, we're going to switch, and depending on the message or the input, we're going to decide whether we want to ignore the input or let it go through the game window. If you don't do this part, if you just remove this, it's going to ignore every other message that doesn't get handled by IMGUI. So it's not going to let you close the window, or it's not going to let the game open files, anything like that. So we need to make sure we ignore the messages we want it to ignore, which are WM key down, which is any key being pressed, because we want the game to ignore our key presses while we're interacting with the menu, so we don't move our character at the same time. If you don't want that, then you would not use this. But I want to be able to use the menu keys as well. We're also going to ignore WM key up. We're going to ignore chars, WM char. I'm going to write the rest of these. So if IMGUI detects that we're interacting with its menu, we're just going to ignore every other message. If we're not interacting with the menu, but the menu is open, then we're just going to ignore key down, key up, char, mouse moves, and button mouse clicks. This is going to make it so we can move our mouse without the game moving where we're aiming or things like that. Otherwise, we're just going to return, call WndProc to the original WndProc, the handle, and with the same arguments. We haven't set this original WndProc yet, but we're going to do that later. But now we have this hooked function for our user input. Now this user input function will work for any game. And this is also a way that you can check for key presses without using get async key state, which is detected in some anti-cheats. So this is another way you can check for key presses. So let's do the toggle menu real quick, which is the easiest one. Show menu equals not show menu. We're gonna get the IO, which is the IO handler for IMGUI, equals IMGUI .get IO, IO.want mouse capture equals show menu. Keyboard is the same. So if our menu is enabled, we want to capture the keyboard. Then we want to draw the cursor as well, because Assault Cube doesn't have a cursor by default, so we're going to have to draw it. And show menu, and then we're going to call the original set relative mouse mode to not show menu, because it's actually backwards here. So when STL set relative mouse mode is set to 1, it's hooking it's hooking our mouse and making it basically just stuck to the center of the screen. When it's 0, then it's just a normal mouse. So we're going to have to call the opposite of that. Now let's do the init. Let's just do this, it's faster. Here we're going to create the context for IMGUI. We're going to set the game window handler we declared earlier. And it's not Counter-Strike, this is Assault Cube. You need to make sure you spell this correctly. Then with the game window, we're going to set the original function for the input hooking we did earlier. It's going to be original WndProc is set window long pointer to the game window. This is the function we're hooking, and this is our new function address we're setting. So it's changing that pointer that the game uses for that function and changing it to this one. When we want to unhook, we're going to use this, but instead we're going to set it to the original WndProc to restore the original input-output function. Then we're going to initialize Windows 32. We're going to initialize OpenGL. I'm going to set the style to dark colors because it looks nicer in my opinion, but it's up to you. We're going to get the IO again. IMGUI IO. Reference to IO equals get IO. We're going to set some conflict flags. We're going to enable keyboard. If you don't want to use, if you want to be able to move while you use the keyboard, then you wouldn't have either of these. Maybe you also wouldn't have this, but I like to use the keyboard for the menu as well. So I'm going to do that. I'm also going to do nav enable set mouse position. So we can actually move the mouse. And we're going to set the current context to the context we just created. We're going to set the window size to that window size we declared earlier, which was initial window size. Now this is just going to set the first window size. After that, you can resize it as much as you want. It's just going to make it so when you make the menu initially, it's not just like a pixel. You can actually see it. Now we're going to hook the actual WglSwapBuffers. We're going to make a new function here. Again, this needs to be exactly the function signature, otherwise it's going to crash. And it's going to be new swap buffers, HDC, which is the handle. What we're going to do first is we're going to check we've initialized IMGUI yet. If not initialized, we're going to initialize IMGUI. Otherwise, we're just going to call, well, actually, we're going to initialize it and then we're going to call the original swap buffers. Otherwise, we're going to set that context to the WGL get current context. This is basically, think of the context as OpenGL's class or state of the various textures like colors or resources, shaders, buffers that the game is using. We don't want to use any of those when we're drawing with our ESP or our menu. So we're going to make our own context. We're going to first set the game context to the current context. Then we're going to check if we haven't made a context yet. So if not context created, we're going to set up context. Otherwise, if we already have a context made, we're going to make that context, make current context to HDC. Our new context that we're making, which I misspelled, we're going to do our menu start render, and render, and then we're going to reset the current context back to the game context. And then we're going to return the original swap buffers so it keeps drawing the game. Let me go up here. Fix my spelling as always. We're going to make a new function. It's going to take HDC void setup context HDC. Let's make it take a reference so it doesn't have to make a copy here. And we're going to set our context to a new context that we're creating. We're going to make current to our context. We're going to set up our matrices. We're going to set up the projection matrix. So matrix mode, GL projection. We're going to load the identity, which is, this makes it so whenever we draw on the screen, we don't make any transformations. Then we're going to set up our viewport, GL int, viewport array of 4. We're going to get the viewport, and then we're going to set, this is setting up OpenGL to use our monitor resolution. We're going to do the same thing for the matrix mode, GL matrix mode. For our model view, we're going to load the identity, and we're going to clear the color as well for this one, just to make sure we don't have any weird colors when we start drawing with IMGUI. This is just black with an alpha of 1, which means it's not translucent at all, or transparent. And we're going to set context created to true. So what the game does is it takes this model view matrix, it takes this projection matrix, and it multiplies it, and it gets the MVP matrix, or the model view projection matrix. It uses this to draw things in relation to the camera. So eventually, when we do our ESP, we're going to have to find this model view projection matrix in the game's memory, so we can use that for world-to-screen functions. This is going to let us use our world space coordinates, or the coordinates you're used to in games, the ones we find with our generated code, like the position here. It's going to let us turn that into the coordinates of our monitor, so we can actually draw on the screen itself instead of trying to draw in the world space. Anyways, let's keep going. Let's go to constants or menu. Let's do this function real quick. This is only 3 lines, I'm pretty sure. It's going to be implementation, OpenGL32, new frame. Then we're going to do the 132 new frame. And then we're going to do just IMGUI new frame. And that's the whole function. Let's do the end render, which is also going to be really quick. It's just these 2 lines. It's going to render. Then it's going to get the draw data from IMGUI, and then it's going to use OpenGL to actually draw it. Let's go back here and let's set up the render, which is where we're going to draw our menu. So if not show menu, we're just going to return. We're going to return. We're going to begin with our begin menu. We're just going to call it menu for now. We're going to pass the address of show menu. This is going to make it so there's a X button on the menu itself. So when we click that button, it's going to change show menu to false. You don't have to pass this argument, but it's just not going to make an X button then. Let's set up some text. Hello world is fine. Let's do a button. If IMGUI button, it's not through toggle menu. Let's do something like TP up. Sure. I'm going to take the local player pointer dot position dot y plus equals 5. Just to make sure it works. And then we're just going to do IMGUI.end because we're finished with drawing the menu. Now let's go to DLL main and actually hook the swap buffers function. We're going to make a new function. Let's call it Aimbot for now. And just move everything that's in here in there. And let's put the hook in there. But let's make a new thread. Oops. And call Aimbot. Eventually we're going to have this with the menu as well, but since we don't have the ESP yet, we're just going to have it on its own thread. So what I like to do here is we're going to sleep for 1 second just to make sure everything else is initialized. Then we're actually going to do the Detours hooking. So for Detours, we want to disable thread library calls. We're going to begin the transaction. We're going to update the thread with the current thread, and then we're actually going to do the hooking. It's detour attach. We're gonna pass the original function, which is the one we have back here. Where is it? this one. And then we're going to replace it with a jump to this function. In this function, we obviously call our own new copy from OpenGL. So we never use this function to begin with. So what happens is, in this function, in the original swap buffers, in the beginning of the function, we're going to have a jump to this function. In this function, we're going to do our processing or whatever we do. And then this function is going to call swap buffers, but from the OpenGL we loaded in here. Before we do that, we also have to detect a key press, because right now there's no way we can enable the menu. So let's do it right here with our aimbot. Let's do bk delete. And if we get that, we're just gonna toggle the menu. So menu, toggle menu. All right, there we go. Before we do that, let me make sure everything seems okay. Let's go to menu.cpp and make sure we initialized everything. We never set the font. Let's set the font real quick. io.fonts. And it's going to be add default, add font default. There we go. And we never set initialize to true. So that could be a problem. And let's std cout menu initialized. Just for testing. Need to include iOS stream. We have context created, rendering, returns on both of these. And that should work. Hope so. Let's test it out. Let me open a cell cube. Inject our DLL. The menu should be initialized. We press delete. We see a menu. And it works. It does not work. We have our mouse never got set back to default, so we probably forgot to put it somewhere. Let's go to menu.cpp. And it's not getting set every frame like we should. So we have it here in toggle menu. And that's the only place we have it. We should probably have it in render as well, because the game on every single frame will try to put it back to relative mouse mode. So let's call original set relative mouse mode to not show menu. And let's try it again. So let's go to a cell cube. And let's inject. Press delete. And it works. We can move. We can interact with our menu. And we can't move or interact with the game at all. We TP up. We go forwards because I put the wrong axis again. But everything else works. And if we press X, it should close the menu. There we go. Perfect. Let's try again. Works. And but anyways, for our next video, we're going to be doing the ESP for real this time.